Hi, everyone. Welcome to Finance Concepts by your Finance-ista Cynthia Bush. Today, we're going to talk about evaluating projects using the payback period method. So first, what are projects? Well, projects are anything where you're expecting a cash outflow, typically upfront, and you also expect cash inflows over the life of the project. An example of that would be buying an apartment building. The cash outflow would be the initial cost to purchase the apartment building. The cash inflows would be the rents that you receive from the tenants minus any operating expenses to run the apartment building each year. So that's one example of a project. Suppose you own a fast food restaurant and you're thinking about launching a new chicken sandwich. That's a project. The cash outflow is the cost to create and launch that new chicken sandwich. So it's the cost of developing the chicken sandwich, including the spices, the chicken itself, new packaging, marketing, sales, the testing and tasting, etc. And the cash inflows will be the incremental sales that you expect at your fast food restaurant from this new chicken sandwich, minus the annual operating expenses. The third example of a project is, let's suppose you own a music video company and you're thinking about buying a new console to create higher quality videos. So the cost of the console is the cash outflow. The cash inflow is the amount you expect to receive of additional business using your new console to create these higher quality videos. So those are all examples of projects. Businesses evaluate projects all the time. And what they're looking at are the cash outflows of the project. I just discussed what it costs to get it off the ground, the cash inflows expected from the project, which are the free cash flows expected after expenses. And you also need to estimate the timing of those free cash flows. And then they also will have some sort of risk component to it. So, as a reminder, free cash flows are revenues minus cash operating expenses. Okay, so this is not net income from the income statement, for those of you who are familiar with accounting. So let's take a look at how we can use payback period to evaluate projects. Let's pretend that you own a coffee shop and you are thinking about purchasing a new cappuccino machine. And you're looking at two different machines. So there's Cappuccino A machine and Cappuccino B machine. And what you're going to do is you're going to estimate the cost to purchase the cappuccino machine. You're going to determine the free cash flow you expect to receive for as long as you own and are using this cappuccino machine. And then you're going to figure out the stub period. So let me show you an example. And as a reminder, to find the free cash flows of the cappuccino machine, we're going to take revenues, which is number of cups sold generated from the cappuccino machine times the price per cup, minus all the cash operating expenses associated with this new cappuccino machine. And that would give the free cash flow for every year. So here's a chart for Cappuccino Machine A. Notice in the left-hand column are the years. And in year 0, which is basically today, you're expecting to pay $10,000 to purchase this machine. That $10,000 would include sales tax and any shipping and delivery charges. So it's the all-in cost for the cappuccino machine. And it's negative because that's money coming out of your business. Then from years 1 through 5, you can see that you're expecting cash inflows. These are new incremental sales, free cash flow that you expect to receive by having this new cappuccino machine. Notice in year 5, you're expecting significantly more free cash flow than the other years. Sometimes that happens. Perhaps in year 5, in the town where this coffee shop is located, you anticipate the NBA All-Star game being in town. And so you expect to quadruple the amount of free cash flow that you would normally generate in any given year. Okay. I will explain the far right column in just a second. Let's take a look at the steps. So step 1, start with your initial negative free cash flow. That's the negative 10,000 in time 0. Step 2, add the free cash flow for each year until you break even. So take the $2,000 you expect in free cash flow in year one, add that to the negative 10,000. Positive 2,000, negative 10,000 gives you 8,000. Do the same in year two. Add positive $4,000 to the negative 8,000 that you have left to break even. That gives you a negative 4,000. And then do the same in year three. Add the positive 3,000 you expect in incremental free cash flow in year three to the negative 4,000 that you have to break even, and you have negative 1,000. So here it is here on the side for years 1, 2, and 3. Notice if you add the free cash flows for years 1, 2, and 3, the 2,000, the 4,000, and the 3,000, that's a total of $9,000. So you're expecting $9,000 in free cash flows over the first 3 years of the project, and that's versus the negative 10,000 you spend to buy the cappuccino machine in the first place. So that's how you have $1,000 to break even at the end of year three. But break even is really zero. So now we need to figure out, okay, well, what's the stub period? So what you do is you look at the $1,000 that you have left that's negative, and you can see in year four, you're expecting free cash flows much more than that 1,000. So you're going to break even somewhere between years 3 and 4. So to find that stub period, take the absolute value of 1,000, in other words, ignore the negative, and divide it by 3,000, which I do here. So for this project, purchasing Cappuccino A machine, you expect that you will break even, or in other words, pay yourself back in 3 1/3 years. Now, each company sets a payback period if they're using this method. If you set for this company a payback period of 4 years or less, that means that you would accept any project that has a payback period of 4 years or less. This project, purchasing Cappuccino A machine, has a payback period of 3 1/3 years. So therefore, you would accept this project, which means you would purchase the cappuccino machine because it pays back, or in other words, breaks even in 4 years or less. Now let's look at Cappuccino B machine. It costs slightly less, it's $8,000. You expect to own it for 5 years, after which time you'll junk it. And notice its pattern of free cash flows, which are different than Cappuccino A machine, but we do the exact same methodology. We're going to start with a negative $8,000. That's what it costs to purchase, ship, and install Cappuccino B machine. We're going to add the expected free cash flows from each year. So I'm going to add for year one, the positive 1,000 to the negative 8,000, and I'm going to have negative 7,000. Year two, I'm going to add positive 2,000 to my negative 7,000, and I'll have negative 5,000. Year three, I'll add positive 2,000 to negative 5,000. That gives me a negative 3,000. And year four, I'll add negative 1,000 to positive 1,000 to negative 3,000, and that gives me negative 2,000. I draw a line under year four because I can see after year four, I'm expecting free cash flows of $16,000 in year five. And my payback that I have left, or the amount I have left to go to break even, is only $2,000 left. So I will break even on this Cappuccino B machine project somewhere after year four during year five. To find that last stub period, we take the $2,000 that's left, ignore the negative, and divide it by the 16,000 that we expect to get in year five, and we get 1/8, or 0.125. So if I purchase Cappuccino B machine, I will break even in 4 1/8 years. If your company has a payback period policy of doing any project that pays back in 4 years or less, you would reject this project. You would not purchase Cappuccino B machine because it takes too long to break even. So here are the two machines side by side. Cappuccino A machine on the left with its free cash flows. Cappuccino B machine on the right with its estimated free cash flows. And again, as we just said, for your coffee shop, if you have a break-even period of 4 years or less, you would buy Cappuccino A machine. You would not buy Cappuccino B machine, given those parameters. Note that for both of the projects, Cappuccino A and Cappuccino B machines, they do have cash flows after the break-even point. Those cash flows are ignored using this methodology. All right, so now let's look at Disney Plus, and that's a project, right? So Walt Disney Company was thinking about what should be their next step in terms of rolling out new offerings for its customers, and they thought about a new streaming business, which they ultimately called Streaming Plus, Disney Plus. That's a project. Someone had to sit around and estimate, well, what would it cost us to launch Disney Plus? And I have totally made these numbers up, but I know that in preparing for Disney Plus, Walt Disney went out and purchased a movie library because they wanted some titles that would appeal to older viewers. They also brought a streaming company because they wanted to make sure they had very strong streaming capabilities. They also had to incur production expenses to create new series, sales and marketing and advertising expenses, etc. So again, I have totally made these numbers up, but we'll pretend that Walt Disney estimates that it would cost $3.548 billion to launch Disney Plus. So that's the initial free cash outflow in time zero. Then Walt Disney is estimating here's the free cash flow they expect each year once they launch Disney Plus. And the revenues would be the number of paid subscribers times how much the subscribers are paying every year, minus the operating expenses, which would be any taxes and development costs and advertising costs, etc. And whatever's left is the free cash flow. So this is a 10-year project. So Disney is assuming that after 10 years, they fold Disney Plus. Maybe at that point it's obsolete. Notice in year 2, free cash flows are expected to go down. Sometimes that happens with a project where for whatever reason you're expecting somewhere in the project's life, you may have lower free cash flows in one year than others, or it may even be negative. So maybe in this example, Walt Disney expects to spend more in developing new series in year 2, and that's why they expect year 2 cash flows to be lower than years 1 and the subsequent years 3 through 10. We do the exact same methodology to try to figure out when would Walt Disney break even on the Disney Plus project. And doing the methodology, you can see that the payback period would be 4.4 years. You start with the initial negative 3.548 billion, and then you add the positive free cash flows from each year until you get to year 4. At the end of year 4, you have negative 1.904 billion left to break even from your original investment. You can look in year 5 and see that you will definitely, well, I shouldn't say definitely, you expect to receive free cash flows that will help you reach break even. So you draw a line under year 4, and you say break even occurs somewhere after year 4 during year 5. To figure out that stub piece, you take the 1.904 and you divide it by 4926, and you get the 0.4. So to break even on the Disney Plus project using my totally made up numbers, it takes 4.4 years. The other project that Disney might have been thinking about was a South American theme park. As you all may know, Walt Disney has theme parks in Europe, they have them in Asia, they have them in North America. They do not have one in South America. They have been rumored to be thinking about that for many years as a potential project. Again, I completely made up numbers about what the free cash flows might look like for Disney to launch a South American theme park. So I made up the number of $5.365 billion as the initial free cash outflow for this project. That would include the cost of buying the land, clearing the land, erecting roller coasters and other rides and hotels. It would include the initial cost of any regulatory things they would have to do, the cost of developing the concept, architectural drawings, engineering, everything. Okay. And then I estimated how much Disney might expect in free cash flows. Notice in year 5, I said, they might have a negative $554 million in free cash flow. So basically that they would spend more than they would take in that year. Maybe in year 5, Disney says, you know what? We need to refresh the rides in the theme park. And so perhaps they close part of the theme park to create, develop, and install new rides. And so in year 5, they have a negative free cash flow. But the methodology is still the same. And if you follow it, you'll see that Walt Disney would break even using these made up numbers in 2.9 years. Okay. You would take the negative 5.365 billion, add the free cash flow expected in year 1. That would leave you with 3.931 billion negative to recoup. Then you add the free cash flow expected in year 2 of 1.75 billion. That would leave you with negative 2.181 billion to recoup before you break even. And you can see you will be able to recoup that amount, assuming that you receive this much free cash flow in year 3. So you break even somewhere between years 2 and 3. And here's how you calculate it. So if Walt Disney is looking at these 2 projects, again, using my made up numbers, they'd say, okay, Disney Plus, the streaming entity, pays back in 4.2 years. The Disney South American theme park pays back in 2.9 years. If the company has a standard that they will do any project that pays back in 4 years or less, they would take a look at these 2 projects and decide they should do the South American theme park. Because of the 2, it's the only one that pays back in 4 years or less. In other words, it breaks even in 2.9 years. So it's up to the company to determine the acceptable payback period. I use the example of 4 years. It could be 10 years, it could be 8.5 years, it could be 2 years, it could be 18 months. The company decides. Most companies will say the shorter the payback period, the better. And if they have the resources, they will accept any project that pays back within the maximum period. If they don't have the resources, then they'll choose whatever project pays back first within that period. So let's look at the advantages of the payback period. The primary thing people like about it, it's easy to calculate. Once you estimate your expected initial cash outflow and you estimate your expected free cash flows for each year of the project, you can calculate the break even, which is the payback period, on the back of a napkin. You do not need Excel or a fancy financial calculator to calculate payback period. Another thing that people like, particularly finance folks, is that it uses expected free cash flows, not accounting profits. And that's important because in finance, we're all about show me the money. We care about the cash that the business is expected to generate or that the project is expected to generate. If I use accounting net income, that includes some non-cash components. So that's why it's so great that payback period uses expected free cash flows and not net income of the project. And the way this works, it emphasizes the earliest cash flows, which are more likely to occur than those in the future, right? If you're estimating a bunch of free cash flows, you'll probably have a better estimate in the early years than you would in the later years. Now let's talk about the disadvantages of the payback period. First of all, the company who is setting the time period to use for the payback, that time period is arbitrary, right? So the company can choose 18 months, they can choose 3 years, they can choose 7 years. I've seen situations where managers say, oh, we're going to do any project that pays back in 3 years or less. Then there's some project they really like and it pays back in 5 years. So then they change the payback period to be 6 years or less so that that project counts. There are other managers who say, well, I'm CEO of this company. My contract is for 5 years, so I'm going to set a payback period of 3 years so I can make sure that we do projects that pay back or break even while I'm still in charge, so I can get credit for them. So that's one issue. Another issue is, and you saw this, it ignores any cash flows generated after you break even. So it could underestimate or overestimate the actual total cash flows generated by the project because it doesn't consider all the cash flows. It just looks at the cash flows that are generated up to break-even point. And if there are cash outflows that are required for the project after the break-even point or after the payback period, it ignores those as well. So those are some disadvantages. But the big one, the big one is that payback period ignores time value of money. It adds all the free cash flows, regardless if they're from year 1, 2, 5, or 7. It just adds them together. And those of you who are familiar with finance concepts know that you can add the present value of expected future free cash flows together, but you cannot just add future free cash flows together like that. That is violating one of the key concepts of finance and is the key reason why I recommend you do not use payback period for large or significant projects. There are better methods. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you for spending time with me to learn about payback period method to evaluate projects. Until next time, this is your Finance-ista Cynthia Bush signing off.